Hey everyone, Fresh here. In this video, I'm going to be breaking down a +8 Darkflame Cleft that I did in week 1 of the War Within. This is a 2 chest, so pretty smooth run overall. I'll go ahead and break down kind of the pulls and everything that we did and the route, as well as just some boss tips and things like that. Initially, when I was first doing this dungeon, I was trying to kind of double up the pulls, so grabbing the next 2 packs in the next room and pulling them in here. That always ended up being kind of sloppy whenever I was doing it. Basically, Pug DPS just want to press their DPS buttons as quick as they can. They don't want to wait for tanks to group things up. So I decided on this run, we're just going to go ahead and kind of do like a single pull there on that first room with all those laborers and that one overseer. And then we'll just kind of come in here and do like this caster pack. One thing you do want to do is try and make sure you're stopping any of those wick lighter bolts that you can with interrupts and CCs. It does do a decent amount of damage even on like non-fortified. So these mole heads are pretty annoying because they will just sit there and cast throw rock. They're basically like archer mobs, and you can't really reposition them without doing some really weird things or having a DK in your group. We do have a DK in this group, so it does make things a little bit easier a little in some of the next couple pulls here. But basically, after you kill that caster pack, you want to grab the padding overseer and pull it into this second overseer. This is a pretty easy pack to do. Just make sure you pull these back enough so that way when they do their wild wallop, they don't knock the laborers into this group, because you don't want to pull this group together. That's pretty rough. And then here you can double up the two groups that are next to each other, but we kind of decided we like just splitting this up a little bit. So pulling the pack on the right by itself, because it has a bunch of these casters that do the wicklighter bolts, makes it a little bit easier to manage those, and then just do this left pack here with the the mole herd that does the throw rock ability. So and you can just focus that, and then once that mole herd's dead, you can pull these pack moles into the next group. This is another group. It kind of has 2 mole herds. As you can see, they're split up. In theory, you can pull these and not pull that second mole herd. But one thing I thought of, I think, is that you might be able to utilize the Overseer's Wild Wallop ability and actually have him throw mobs into a wall behind them so it doesn't really reposition them. I actually thought of that as I was doing this dungeon, so I'm going to have to test that out and see if that will work better. I kind of think I just reposition the mobs and make it so that they get thrown kind of all over the place. But basically, ideally, you want to just keep all the mobs grouped up when you can. So it's pretty good to try to not pull that one separately. All right, here, this is the first boss for the dungeon. The most important thing, particularly at lower keys, that you may find yourself running into is that when he summons this dynamite cart, you need to make sure that your group is killing it immediately. If that dynamite cart timer ends, it will explode, and it's a group wipe if it does explode. Beyond that, basically, I try to basically tank this boss next to a pillar. There's a couple things that does. One is that it does put it next to the tracks, so that way players that are fixated with the laborers can kind of try to use the carts that are going across the tracks to kill some of the laborers. And then also, if a dynamite cart does spawn next to us, it's easy to reposition to. But basically, the dynamite cart will always spawn in one of these 4 tracks, kind of at the end. In fact, we're about to get another cart here pretty soon. You can see that notification there that it's popping up. So once it's up, make sure you kind of reposition. Fortunately, the paladin was really good about always watching for that. Essentially, if you haven't done this dungeon yet, you'll probably wipe once on the cart, and then you won't forget it. But try to get to it as quick as you can as a tank. I actually don't think I did a great job in this run getting to the cart as quickly as I could, because if you move to the cart, then the other players will recognize, even if they aren't aware of the cart, that, oh, there's something there that I need to kill, and that way they can go ahead and kill that. And then here, for this pull, I like to kind of do these 3 candle mobs. Basically just grouping these up, along with that small kobold group that's in that corner. One thing you want to make sure is that you are moving north and south with your movement, because I don't like to pull anything extra in this room. I do know there's a way you can like pull a bunch of stuff in this room to do like a big pull, and then there's like a skip you can do. You can skip like the mini bosses, but since most of my routes and guides and things like that are kind of based around like players that aren't really doing anything super coordinated, basically this is what I like to do. Just pull these 3 big candles, pull the Cobalt group, and then just move back and forth on that little ledge there, going north and south. The only thing you have to make sure for is watch out for the little orange circles from the Cobalt. That is a stun circle that they will put down on the ground, so if you're standing in it, you'll get stunned. It's bad if you get stunned. Some of my early dungeons, I was getting stunned by those, especially because they are hard to see in those big red circles that the candle mob leaves on the ground. So just try to be really kind of aware of it and keep an eye out for it. And then when you come in this room, try to help as much with kicks and knocks as you can on the Blazing Fiends. Those casts are pretty dangerous in conjunction with like the AoE damage that the candle is doing. So, and then we go to the second boss, Blazicon. This boss is very easy as a tank. You basically have no responsibility. One thing to keep in mind, the boss does have a very small hitbox. So as you can see here, I'm kind of standing inside of his circle. I think as long as you're in his circle, you'll be in melee range. Because if you move out of melee range, he'll start channeling like basically a group wipe AoE. So, but other than that, you really don't have much responsibility as a tank. You just need to make sure you're in melee range the whole fight, and then just dodge anything that comes up on the ground. As you can see, those flames come up. Just don't stand in them. When you see like these patterns, stand in a light, part, not a dark part. When you see one trick with the tornado ability, I can't remember what it is. I think it's this Wicklighter Barrage. No, that's the fire on the ground. Basically, there's a tornado ability that he does, and it targets everyone in the group except for you. The way you can avoid getting hit by that is just make sure, it's this Extinguishing Gust actually, just make sure you don't have another player behind you, because if there's no other player behind you, then you won't have a tornado heading towards you, so you'll just completely avoid it. So that's one way to kind of keep it out. The Paladin's kind of like a little bit scatterbrained with his movement, so it kind of made it a little bit tricky, but basically I just try to always make sure that there's never a player behind me when I'm doing this boss. Other than that, yeah, you're just going to stand here and you're just going to DPS the boss, essentially. So pretty easy boss without a lot of tank responsibility. So kind of nice. It's kind of interesting this season. Some of these bosses in these dungeons, you have like no responsibility as a tank. You literally just sit there and do your rotation. Some of the fights you have a ton of responsibility, where there's a lot of things that you have to do as a tank to make sure the fight goes correctly. But this is one of the stand still and look pretty fights. So that's Blazicon. And then we'll be going into this next room here. As a warrior, you can, if these are all synced up correctly and you spell reflect, you can actually spell reflect all of them. As you can see, I spell reflected a pretty good chunk of them. But you can also use spell block as well, because when you walk into this room, you should be the first one in there, using leap to get there. So they should all target you with the initial flame bolt. So you'll eat all of them. Hopefully spell reflect any that are synced up, and then just spell block the rest of them. And we'll go into this mini boss pack. One thing I was trying to do is I was trying to see if a tank can intercept the one-handed, grab that he does on a random party member. I don't think you can, but I wasn't able to I'm still not 100% sure, but I'm fairly certain you can't intercept it as the tank. I think whoever gets targeted just has to eat it. People have said you can outrange it, but we've had people stay 80 yards away, and they still end up just getting, the guy charges on them and they still getting, stunned basically. So I think they just kind of have to deal with it. I don't think it does that much damage, so I don't think it's a big deal. That flaming tether will stun you as a tank, so it's pretty important to kind of kick that. It's also good just to kick cinder flame bolts whenever you can, just throw them out there just to stop a little bit of damage. So as you can see, the warlock in our group was pretty far back, but still ended up eating that charge there. But overall, these guys are pretty easy. There's not really a lot of tank damage. Just move them away from the candles whenever they spawn, and that should be it. They might be tougher on fortified keys, but... Then we'll go into the third boss here, the Candle King. This is, I think, the hardest boss in the dungeon, although I think they did nerf the damage from these molds here, because each of these molds does like a pulsing AoE damage. So the more molds there are, the more damage is going out in the group. But my healer said it seemed like the damage output was a lot lower since they just put the nerfs out. So I think this should be a lot easier to do. When we did it earlier in the week, it was definitely a very large amount of damage going out on the group, and there's not really a great way to mitigate it other than just doing the pickaxe and the circle mechanic correctly. So as a tank, you will never get targeted with a circle, but you will occasionally get targeted with a pickaxe. So just when you get targeted with a pickaxe, make sure you're standing behind a mold. It doesn't matter which mold, just any mold. So that way the pickaxe gets thrown into the mold. And then kick Paranoid Mind. As a warrior, basically any, spec with a 15-second interrupt, you can kick every other Paranoid Mind, so somebody else will need to cover, the other ones. So I do make a mistake in this, though, because basically I try to reposition the boss here because, as you can see, the ground's kind of getting covered up with wax. Honestly, I probably didn't need to reposition, but I didn't like being in that corner. I realized nobody's sending their kick on the fear, so I'm like, I guess I have to charge in and kick it, which was a big mistake because there's a mold right in his way, so when you land on a mold, it stuns you. So big mistake on my part trying to reposition there, and nobody using their interrupt. As you can see, it's mostly just me and Cuddlers using our interrupt. Locks kind of helps a little bit, but Warlocks have a pretty long, cooldown on their interrupt, so it should definitely be on the melee to be helping out with that. So, but anyways, after killing that, we'll be going into this cart section. Honestly, this cart section is, I think, totally fine compared to how it was in normal and heroic. It's really not that bad. Fortunately, I have a healer that is good about managing the candles and keeping the cart moving. For the most part, just you just tank the things that are next to the cart. Most of these mobs don't really do anything. They do put a little explosion circle on the ground when they die, kick the drain lights to just keep the health up on your candle. Alright, this is the one mob I do want to talk about in this section though, Corridor Creeper. So this mob will put a stacking dot on you, as you can see, and it just does shadow damage. You can't clear it with Dwarf Racial. Basically, I think you have to have an immunity or a way to prevent magic effects from being applied to you, so I think DKAMS would stop it, but Warriors sadly do not have a way to stop the dot application, and the higher that dot stack gets, the more it will truck you. So basically, try to only ever fight one Corridor Creeper at a time if you can. 2 is manageable. I have tanked 2 before, but it is very, very sketchy. It involves me blowing a lot of cooldowns, walls, last stands, cycling through Spell Reflect, all that kind of stuff. So one other thing I did find out as well is that these Corridor Creepers do more damage by killing mobs around them. As you can see, that little, I think it's that worm stack that was showing up on Plater. It had 5 stacks. Essentially, it will sit there and eat corpses of dead enemies around it, and it will get a stacking damage buff, 10%. You can see the stack just popped up there, so it's 10% damage for every one. So if you get a big pull with a lot of extra little mobs and they all die next to the Corridor Creeper, that's when I think the damage gets really bad. So sometimes if you can, it's not a bad idea to try and fight the Corridor Creepers by themselves. So, and like I said, try to never fight 2 at a time. One thing there is a section point in this this cart track where there are 2 Corridor Creepers close together. If the cart's track stopped before them, pull the closest Corridor Creeper and kill it ASAP, so that way the cart doesn't move, and pull both of the Corridor Creepers, without you being able to have any control over it. Try to just fight them one at a time. It will make your life much easier as a tank. So anyways, now we are doing the cart run. This scene always bit always reminds me of the scene in the Thing at the end of the movie where Kurt Russell throws the dynamite at the big thing. One of my favorite movies, by the way. So anyways, okay, so now we're coming to the final section here. We've got 97% on count. We've got plenty, so we can just clear to the left here and get to the darkness. So as you can see here, I'm just kind of pulling this Corridor Creeper, but I think my healer says, you know what, we can pull we can pull 2 creepers, it'll be fine. If you don't feel comfortable, just single pull that 1 creeper, kill it, and then after your stacks drop off, go ahead and just go to the next creeper and kill it. Again, like I said, these are fairly rough. But I do think they're not quite as bad since the nerfs, but as you can see, they still hit fairly hard. But you can use mitigation to try and stop some of the damage. I don't think I was pressing Spell Reflect enough, honestly, here, just as the magic damage reduction, and I should be, so definitely a mistake on my part. And again, like I said, another trick is the less mobs you kill, extra mobs you kill, means that the Corridor Creeper will get less stacks on it, so... Alright, and then the final boss. Couple tricks here. First thing, when I start the fight, I like to just grab the candle and push it kind of more to the center of the room rather than leaving it where it starts. That means that this is now kind of positioned closer to the four corners of each room, so that way the DPS and healer that are running out and grabbing the candles and running them back to the center are able to do it a little bit easier. Your other kind of responsibilities in this fight, I generally just move the candle when he does Umbral Slash. So Umbral Slash is the big frontal he does. You'll see that big like kind of light beam come out. So I will grab the candle and just move that generally to the right, but you can go either direction. It doesn't really matter. Just shift it 90 degrees to one direction. And then the other thing you have to do is when he does his call spawn ability, make sure you are ready to interrupt that ASAP, because the faster you interrupt that, the less stuff gets spawned. I think our healer picked that up by mistake. He didn't mean to. As you can see, I was able to snap kick that. There's Umbral Slash. We're going to move it away. And another thing to keep in mind, if there are ads up when you have to move it for Umbral Slash, just try to reposition it away from the ads to give your DPS a little bit more time to kill the ads as they're approaching the candle. And then other than that, you're basically just standing there tanking the boss just kind of where it's at, and then just picking up the candle when he does Umbral Slash, repositioning about 90 degrees, drop the candle, and then you should be good. And then that's, yeah, pretty much Darkflame Cleft. Overall, I think this dungeon is actually one of the easier dungeons probably in the rotation. It definitely seemed relatively easy. The big thing is just learning the gimmicks on the boss fights. Once you kind of understand the boss fight gimmicks, I think this is actually a pretty easy dungeon. There's not too much crazy stuff that's like gonna cause issues, I think, in groups. So overall, I kind of like the changes they've made to this dungeon. I was a little bit worried at the beginning of the expansion when this was going to be a Mythic Plus. I was worried that the minecart section was going to suck. Just lots of things that feel like they could have been a lot worse on this dungeon, but they did a pretty good job, I think, at balancing this. And overall, I've been kind of liking this dungeon quite a bit. So thanks again, everyone, for watching. Go ahead and like and subscribe, and you can also check me out over at Twitch at twitch.tv/freshtanking. I do stream my Mythic Plus runs over there.